this one is a little bit late. Turning right here onto, was it Highway 14 alternate, which leads you through Spearfish Canyon. And I'll tell you what's happened is I recorded the audio and I just wasn't happy. And then I was busy, which is why I wanted to upload it at that point anyway. So here I am, uploading it, getting this puppy done. And what I wanted to get into today is more some personal reflections. And I have a little bit of stuff I got from a viewer that I think is helpful and actually kind of ties it all together very nicely. So I will include that at the end. But don't expect a whole lot of citations and footnotes in this one, because this is more personal opinion, more personal impression. Toward the end, I will also get into a couple articles that I found of interest. I think I have linked them before, but probably did not talk about them deeply. So let me start out with my background. Why do I care about rural United States? Well, I've lived in the rural United States my whole life. I grew up in Pennsylvania, in the rural part of Pennsylvania, although one of those parts was turning quite a lot less rural. College was in a small town, and then I moved to North Dakota in a rural area. In fact, my parents still live in the house where I lived as a high schooler on an unpaved road. So, yeah, I know rural. I have lived it. Am I a farmer or rancher? No. But that's why I've taken a personal interest in it. And I'll be honest, I enjoy my visits to the city. Driving in them kind of freaks me out. I can do it, but I don't like it. I enjoy the variety of restaurants. I enjoy the variety of shops, but then I want to get the hell out. And usually about a day in a city is too much. That's actually why I like going down to the Black Hills, because, maybe I'll spend half the day in Rapid City if I really need to. But then I'll go somewhere like this. So, that's just me. So there are a lot of things I like about rural areas. A big one is I know people. Now, yes, you know people in the cities too. But when you have a lot of people around, it's a lot easier to find your little clique, your people that are like you. I don't really know that many fountain pen lovers here in North Dakota. My friends are not centered around the world of fountain pens and making strange YouTube videos where you drive. So my friends are pretty diverse. That said, sometimes you're stuck with them. I will tell you another good thing with knowing people is families. And in my line of work as a teacher, that's important. Because then I know, that's what this kid is going home to. Sometimes for better, sometimes for worse, let's be honest. So I have a lot more empathy and understanding of a student, rather than just, that kid's kind of obnoxious. And when you know what they have to go home to, suddenly, sometimes you really understand why. And rather than taking out on them as a personal fault, you can work with them to find better ways to cope in school. So I think those are good things. Another one that I really like is the businesses know me. Now, yes, have I had bad service in local businesses? Absolutely. There's a couple I boycott. Is there one business in the past that may or may not have threatened to call the police because I was so pissed at them? Maybe. Well, we won't go into that story. Not a moment I'm particularly proud of either. Let's be honest. But they know you, so they're likely to treat you better. Now, sometimes they also get that attitude, well, I'm the only one, so what are you going to do? Grocery shop 50 miles down the road? And you're like, oh, yeah. Awkward. So, those are good things. Another one I've always liked, because I walk, I'm a lot happier in the city once I'm out of my car. I like in a small town that you can walk everywhere. And that's one of the things that's been annoying me about this particular small town, is we now have 3 businesses that were on Main Street now outside of town, and another business has just closed down altogether. And I'm not thrilled with that. But overall, I can walk. I mean, this town is probably the biggest one I've lived in for a long time. but it's still small enough. It's perfectly walkable. And, as long as the weather's decent and I'm not in a hurry, I can even walk out to those businesses in the outskirts of town. It's just, hopefully I don't have a lot to carry when I do so, because it is a hike. And another thing you get more of, I've found, and this is one of those, your mileage may vary. I will say that. Because I've had the opposite experience too. In fact, that's going to be in my negative side. So hang on for that if you're going to listen to this and say, I don't think so. But what I've found is, because they know me, a lot more acceptance. They're a lot less likely to demonize that science teacher for teaching that their evolution, because they know who I am and they know my intentions. Whereas if I'm just the science teacher who they have no idea who I am as on a personal level, they may react to me differently. Like I said, there's another side to that, so I'll be coming back to that one. In my line of work, smaller classes. And I think that's a good thing. Now, the bad side of that, of course, is, what if the school says, oh yeah, we don't need this many science teachers, which could happen. I get to be a big fish in a small pond. I kind of enjoy that. In a larger town, you just don't get to be everything. And I kind of like, I do photography for the paper. I write some articles for the paper. I used to be an EMT, but that one was just not feasible. Different community organizations I've been involved with. The bad side of that is sometimes you just start saying, yeah, I'm in too much. And in a small town, there's just not enough people, because it is only a smaller set that volunteers and does these kinds of things anyway. So sometimes you end up being, if you're one of those people that does get engaged, you end up over-engaged, and then you get so mad you want to quit. So there's that. But you can be involved. I have found, now this is kind of school dependent, but I get a lot more freedom in my teaching. Now, I did end up leaving one job because they really didn't like how I taught. But overall, I've had a lot of freedom. And in part, that's because I'm the only one. Now, if I'm in a group of 5 or 6 physics teachers, you're not going to get that freedom, because you have to cover the same material at the same time, especially if they're switching classes. You don't want to be, well, take Squirrel's class, he's the easy one, or avoid Squirrel, he's the hard physics teacher. You have to have a more consistent experience in a larger school, and with good reason. And I have found, generally, it's a little cheaper to live in a rural area. At the same time, salaries aren't as good. So that also can be a double-edged sword. Now, there are things that I don't like. And this is before I get into any stereotypes or anything, but just my experience. One of the things I don't like is people know your business, or think they do, or even worse, think they should know your business. I saw you had your car out. Where were you Saturday? None of your flippin' business. If I wanted you to know, I would have told you. Well, who'd that car belong to that was at your house all weekend? None of your business. Who's that girl you were with? None of your business. And that's one of those things I don't like in a small town. Now, I mentioned this double-edged sword with acceptance. I have also seen where people just can't find their place and they're ostracized. I've experienced that. You're just too different in some way, or you do something that pisses the wrong people off. And in a small town, especially if you're not local, they'll gang up on you. Because, a lot of the people were born here and still live here. And that's definitely the dark side of that. And there's some differences they'll accept, some they won't. Now, I will say overall, this town where I live is reasonably accepting of different races and sexual orientations and religions. But what if you're, shall we say, more ostentatious about it? You are, not just a Muslim, but you're a very devout practicing Muslim who makes it very visible. Well, I have, I don't know because I haven't seen that one. I intentionally picked an example that I haven't seen so nobody would try and figure out who I'm talking about. But, not going to be accepted. In fact, going to be ostracized. Um, I have known of a few cases of people who end up leaving the town because they don't fit. Leaving the school because they don't fit. And I'm going to keep these intentionally generic because, again, real people I'm talking about. Bigotry. And yeah, you can get that in the city too. So don't go saying, well, move to the city. No bigotry there. No. But what happens in a small town is sometimes it's, shall we say, unintentional bigotry. People just have not experienced different cultures or different races or different sexual orientations, and they have no idea how to respond to it. They don't realize how to handle it. And I've been guilty of that too. I know one for me. I spent several years teaching on the Indian reservation. And what I've discovered is how much I did not know about the Native American community and Native American culture, good and bad. There was just a lot I didn't know. But I'll tell you what, during the Standing Rock protests over the past year, I had a much better appreciation for what was going on than I would have had before working on the reservation. And that's not the reservation where I taught. Doesn't matter which one I taught on, but anyway, I learned so much. And one of the things I learned, this story may be getting a little too specific, but let's just say the involvement of these students with certain schools off the reservation, and how these schools they were associated with, one of them just wanted nothing more to do with them because they realized they had too many Native Americans in these programs and not enough of them local kids, and ended the association. I'm definitely keeping that one generic, and why? Because they don't like hearing, oh, Joe's Standing Bear has made another basket at the basketball games. They want to hear Joe Whitmer made another basket at the basketball game. And that one I think was more outright racism. In some small towns, religion is just too powerful. In a small town, you do have limited social venues. So the church, it becomes one of those social venues. And sometimes that can be a force for good, sometimes it's not. These churches that don't like gays or preach bigotry or are kind of white separatist churches, you don't want one of them powerful. I'm very uncomfortable with a lot of the evangelical churches. I think that would be a topic for another video. But let's just say I think they're a force for bad. Of course, there's limited social opportunities in a small town. You have very limited cultural opportunities. Some people don't even know how to act at a concert. Because when do they go to a concert? Well, when their kid has a concert at school, and that's it. Often the shopping is very limited. Now, the rise of online has been kind of a two-edged sword there. Yes, you can buy things living in a small town that you could not buy before. Same time, that online shopping is shutting down local businesses and then making the situation even more limited. And then one that can happen in a small town is just a lack of educational opportunities. basically you have to get out of the small town. The local school may be good or bad. That in a small town that you don't have the large mass of teachers and whatnot to give you that leveling off thing. Um, so if you have one English teacher in your school and she doesn't know what she's doing, well, good luck. One science teacher and she doesn't even have a degree in science of any kind. What are you gonna do? One math teacher who is a genius at math, but he absolutely cannot explain it to anybody. That's a real thing. And of course, higher education. I I can't take classes at the local university. The nearest university is 90 miles away. If I want to get a master's degree, I'm pretty much guaranteeing, unless it's in one or two very narrow fields that I'm not interested in, I'm going to have to go live somewhere else, which is a big financial hardship for me. So, that's just a problem with rural areas. There's not a way around it. I think their online education offers some opportunities, but I've taken some online classes. I don't like them. And you read the research about them, and yeah, there's reasons not to like them. There are issues with online courses that you don't have with when you have a teacher right there in the classroom. Now, I have a link in the video description to an article in The Economist that actually explores a few of the small towns near where I live. And actually, they interviewed a few people that it turns out I know. So that was interesting. Now, kind of interesting, this article, and I'm holding the laptop in my lap now. This article was written shortly after I moved to North Dakota because I started teaching in a little town in North Dakota back in August of 1999, and this article is September 16th of 1999. It points out about the shrinkage of a town called New England. Talks about businesses shutting down, the railroad stopped coming, Catholic schools shut down. By the way, the Catholic school in New England is now a jail, which interesting. And in 1999, New England was about 600 people. Now, the rate of shrinkage has slowed down. I'm just going to quick Google the actual population of New England. It's still around 600, between 500 and 600 now. So, that has stabilized. And actually, at this time, there was a lot of shrinkage going on. Thanks to oil and just finding that new equilibrium, a lot of the shrinkage has slowed down. But, there are a lot of businesses closed in New England and all over. They mentioned Mott. I think the editor... Oh, okay, Mott is the last rural Catholic school that closed. Although that is true that the old Catholic school in New England became a jail, women's jail. Make of that what you will. I actually know I teach with somebody who went to that rural Catholic school in Mott. But it talks about some of these other things about, one quote here, there is a slow acquiescence to fate. People built these farms, but farms are getting larger. Farm prices have never been grand. Yet we have these farmers, nowadays they're college educated, but especially at that time, they were finding they couldn't make a living on farming alone. So I knew a lot of farmers, less of them now. Oh, by the way, pulled off here to look at Bridal Veil Falls. But anyway, I less farmers now, but yeah, they just could not live on farm income, so they often had a job as well as farming. Which, by the way, my grandfather did that back in Pennsylvania. He worked at Corning Glass, and then he also had a farm. It mentions about some flooding and all. It goes through a whole bunch of really depressing things, And the father Tom Grainer there in New England talks about all the farmers coming to him for support. Mentions oh yeah, some more people I know. Pastors Jerry and Carolyn Erickson. I actually know them. Spent much of their time giving counsel to anxious and depressed farmers and ranchers. Jerry helps cash-strapped farmers with their chores. Those are all, and those are all things that were going on. John another one I know. He's built up with it's called the Logging Camp Ranch. You can actually stay there, so plug for John Hanson. Um, but anyway, he's one that's got a more hopeful note. He's trying something different, which apparently has worked. Don Nordby, I actually don't know him, but I know several of his relatives. Um, yeah, that's kind of cool. I'd forgotten there were so many names in here that I knew. Roger Johnson, I knew his brother. Um, anyway, the whole article basically leaves you very depressed about the fate of rural America and doesn't offer a whole lot of hope to go with it. And it does point out, this is it's towards the end of the article, America doesn't really protect its farmers the way European countries protect theirs. And that's true. And it brings up kind of a scary point that we do need to be able to feed ourselves. Now, one thing I read recently, and I don't know where, otherwise I'd give you a citation, but now there are more younger people going into farming, which was not the case back then. Back then, a lot of people that, were third, fourth generation farmers, and their kids had no intention of returning to the farm. And then what? And I know an older couple I know several older couples in that situation right now that they have nobody interested in taking over the farm. And what do you say? I mean, what do they do? I don't have an answer. You start up a business in a small town, and of course, in the small town, the profit margin is going to be a lot slimmer. But now that population has dropped and everything is in decline, who's going to buy it from you? Yes, you've made a living at it, but is it enough to get somebody to say, hey, I'm going to take this over? The town I moved to in North Dakota used to have a drugstore, hardware store, a very nice restaurant, grocery store, a lumber yard, had a lot of businesses. Most of them closed. Why? The owners got old. Nobody there to take it over. The guy at the hardware store, he actually says one of his big mistakes is he should have sold it because he had the chance to sell it, but he just wanted to hang on a few more years. And then by then, the writing was on the wall and the store closed without ever finding a buyer. And what can you say? If you're a school, how do you attract teachers, especially teachers that want to stay? Especially as the town is drying up and visibly drying up. There are some schools in the state that really struggle to find teachers. My school struggles because of our location. We're just so far away from everything. Other schools with good locations struggle because the town is just so oip. And teachers look at it and they're like, yeah, no future here. On that note, I did actually find another article that was quite interesting that I also have linked down below. This article was about a town. The title of the article is America's Loneliest Town, and it's about a town called Ely, Nevada. I might be pronouncing that state wrong, and I apologize if you're from there. I know people named Nevada and Nevada. They go by both names. Depends on which one I'm talking to, and then I can't remember which one the state goes by. So if I'm saying that wrong, definitely apologize. So here's one of the wild things about Ely, Nevada. It is shrinking. It's not as small as the town I live. It's about it is not about 6,000 people. It was 6,000 people. It's probably now about maybe 4,000 people. But anyway, that's still bigger than where I live. But here's what's kind of wild about it. Um, how do you like your internet that you're using to stream this video? They don't have it in Ely. There is no broadband band in Ely, Nevada, whatever it is. And I am pronouncing the town right. I just can't remember how to pronounce the state. So darn you people that I know named after a state and not pronouncing it consistently. If I ever get to the state, then I'll be able to remember how to pronounce it. But right now, especially this is night. But what, of course, happened there, this was an economy based around copper mines. And copper prices went down in the 70s, and then that caused the copper mines to close, the smelter closed, and the employment rate actually, according to this article, got to about 25%. The mine has closed and reopened several times, but that's actually a problem in rural areas. Often one big business is it. Think of coal mining towns in West Virginia. Now, what I liked about this article is it does show the influence a few dedicated people can have. There's this, what was his name? Juan Carlos Cervantes. Anyway, what he's looking at is trying to push this town to be more modern. And actually, internet is one of the things he's focusing on. He also is really focusing on opportunities for young adults. Just to give them a good feeling about being there, so it's more possible they'll come back, because it is hard to get people who aren't from a rural area to move to one. But anyway, I don't want to read the whole article to you, but especially because I'm coming near the end of my footage and I got two more things I got to cover yet. But the short version is, this really shows the power of an individual. At the same time, it does show the limits of one person. And that too often people are waiting for a savior who's never going to come. So I would suggest reading that article. And my third link is a much darker article. I recognize some truth in it, and maybe I have my blinders on a little, and definitely I live in a different part of the country. Where I live, North Dakota, yes, most people are Christian, but it's not the same kind of Christian that you'll find in a more Pentecostal area, let's say. Here it's mainline denominations, particularly Lutheran and Catholic. You go to the south, of course, you got the Pentecostals, and you have a lot more of the independent churches that sprouted up, Baptists and so on. I mean, they're around here, but they're not. Lutheran is the big one. And this article talks about how Democrats fail to understand white working class flyover America. Well, this person, the author of this article, says that they grew up in rural Christian white America. Now, as I said, rural America is getting to be less white. So it's also possible, I couldn't quite figure out the age of this person, the author, but I have the feeling they may be a little older than me, but then writing for Alternet, that I'd say that's a younger skewing article. But then they don't exactly give their name for SETI's Justice, which I don't think is their real name. But they talk about closed off belief systems, the anti-intellectualism, anyway, a lot of things, being infected by right-wing media. I really don't want to spend my time sharing everything that's in the article that you can read. But they do bring up, the author brings up a few good points that for example, about education, this was the one I highlighted to bring up in the article, is that it's not that people are anti-education, but they don't trust education. Uh, they want their kids to learn to read and write and so on, but they don't want them learning to think deeply or question fundamentally held beliefs. You might remember in another video I talked about Texas, and the Republican Party was against teaching high order thinking skills. What? But I have the feeling, just reading this is a more southern culture, just from it really doesn't match my experience in a lot of ways. Closed off fundamentalist belief systems being susceptible to propaganda, yeah. But listening to people like Rush Limbaugh, Sean Hannity, and so on, yeah. I was talking to somebody the other day who I thought was basically a pretty nice person. Turns out they really like Pastor Hagee. Like, really? And you'll find a lot of people around here like education until you bring up climate change. Now, there are people that don't believe in evolution, but we don't have too many open creationists around here. But climate change, ooh, baby. Yeah, that's all liberal scam. So, anyway, I would just suggest reading the article for yourself and form your own opinion. I don't see it as that bad, but some of the economic trends that the article talks about and the drug trends, yes. I also found on the dark side an interesting video by The Guardian that takes a look at coal country in West Virginia. So if you want a visual that's different from, Spearfish, South Dakota, that's a very good one. Meets a lot of people. Some of them they had to use it's a good thing they use subtitles, because I couldn't understand some of the people. They just speak a very different kind of English than I do. And that's Appalachia, and that's an area that's been decimated by closing of the coal mines. So that's a worthwhile watch. Huffington Post has actually been doing a little series of articles where they're visiting. I don't know. I find it slightly condescending, but anyway, they're visiting these parts of America that are supposedly have been neglected. But they had an interesting article in Wyoming, which kind of matches up with what I've been saying about where I live. And Wyoming is like North Dakota, perhaps a bit more redneck, but basically North Dakota. And talks about how a lot of what gets people riled up in other parts of the country really doesn't work. They're not interested in that whole gay rights and abortion thing. I think you'll find in general people aren't as favorable toward abortion here in North Dakota, but they don't really care that much. You'll find a few worked up over gay rights and bathroom bills and all that, but yet at the same time, that's not something that really animates people. And that's what they were talking about in this article, is that conservative doesn't mean the same thing everywhere. And I think that's actually been a mistake that the Republican Party has made. I mean, we'll be political for a second, is getting these, tying their party to religion, because they've had to pick up a lot of bullshit to go with it. I think if they stuck to economic issues, they wouldn't turn off as many people. Like the state of Wyoming. Now, of course, state of Wyoming, that's going to be one of those states where they are definitely, in fact, that's the reason they rejected the NGS science standards, was because of the stuff about climate change, because the energy industry is very powerful. And a lot of people are employed by that. And anyway, that's actually an interesting read too. And this is getting long, so I still haven't gotten to my last one. I'm going to add a little more footage here so I can just finish it. What I want to close with are two hopeful settings. One is Livingston, Montana. Now, what's kind of interesting about Livingston, Montana, It starts out kind of depressing, it talks about the rural decay and all the pollution left by the railroad industry. But then it also, on the other side of that, shows some hope and how Livingston has changed over the years and how it's adapted. And, how it has dealt with the railroad legacy and so on. That's kind of an interesting read. Just gives you a little bit of history, and it's another one of those Huffington Post slumming it in the rural areas for a while. But anyway, it actually does kind of show how it can clean up, how they can start to recover, how a town can change and survive in a rural area. So I would suggest reading that one. But I'm going to close with an even more hopeful article. So you might have noticed a jump there. I decided to skip ahead to Belle Fourche, South Dakota. I don't know when I'll use this footage ever again, so I thought, what the heck. So I drove through Belle Fourche and took a swoop down its main street and gave you a quick glance around the town. This is a town of about 5,500 people, and it's just to the north of Spearfish. It's smaller, it suffers a little just because of the closeness to Spearfish, and yet it's big enough to have definitely a lot of its own businesses at the same time. So this is Belle Fourche, South Dakota. I'll put how it's spelled here. So I'll be honest, I haven't spent a lot of time in Belle Fourche, and now I'm thinking maybe I should walk around Belle Fourche a little bit. Fun fact, the South Dakota State High School Rodeo is always held in Belle Fourche. And interestingly enough, my own town is where the North Dakota State High School Rodeo is held every year. So kind of fun that both states have their state high school rodeo in the western end of the state and not even in one of the big towns in the western end of the state. So cool. Belle Fourche is, it's not a bad town. It's just like I said, it's kind of overshadowed by Spearfish. Belle Fourche is right on the edge of the Black Hills, so it definitely has a more prairie feel than, say, Spearfish. But it's neat. There's a nice little park that's down in a valley along the, was it a river or a creek? I can't remember off the top of my head. Well, I'm recording this in the evening again, so that may be my problem. But anyway, while we're wandering around Belle Fourche, I want to talk about an article that I was sent. My furnace came on if you're hearing that, but I'm upstairs, so I'm hoping it's quiet enough you don't hear it. But anyway, this article is from the New Yorker, and it's actually about a town called Orange City, Iowa. I have never been there. Founded by people from Holland, which is interesting. Anyway, it's county seat of Sioux County, Iowa, if you really care. Population is about like Belle Fourche, about 5,000 or 6,000 people, and it's in the northwest corner of Iowa. Now, I don't know Iowa very well, but I do see that I'm at my limit for how often I can read the article, so this may turn out to be extremely awkward. Luckily, I used Evernote, so I may be able to read it there. Okay, here we go. Yeah. So I don't want to get into the whole history, but it makes a big point about the number of churches in town, low unemployment, which, by the way, is another thing, North Dakota, low unemployment. Which makes me say that rural up here is quite different from maybe the stereotype or what it is in other parts of the country. 98% graduation rate at the high school, that's about how we are. Median home price, okay, you lost me now. $160,000, oh no. Well, 3 or 4 bedroom house, maybe. That would be a high end for a house that size here, but median income close to 60,000. That's actually better than they do here. So this article spends a little bit more time on culture, basically how this culture that settled the area still has a big influence on the town and all the festivals and touristy things that they do. And it also mentions that people are a lot less mobile now than they used to be, which I find interesting. I guess I wouldn't have thought that, so I think I want another source to either confirm that or contradict it. Again, I know one of my thoughts has been when I read about some of these areas, like that video on West Virginia, it just, why don't you leave? I mean, if there are no jobs there and you're unemployed and you're desperate, why don't you go somewhere where there are jobs? And I know we had a lot of them move to North Dakota during the oil boom to find work here. So why aren't more people doing that? But of course, I know how hard it is to move, especially when you're established in a community and all your friends and your support, and maybe you own a house there. So, I'm not going to judge too much there. But one of the things that was interesting in this article is a little piece about a gentleman named Dan Vermeer. Um, just why he left the town, and but then how he ended up coming back. But he'd also at the same time become a bit more worldly due to his education and his travels and so on. And it gets into other people who've left the area and why and what they missed and what they liked about when they left and so on. And I would just suggest reading through all them because those are good anecdotes that I teach people like that. I mean, I know their experience. Heck, I am one. I didn't want to stay in my stifling small town, so I traded it in for a different stifling small town. They do mention other reasons to move back that I've considered. My parents are getting older. My father is close to 80. My mother is in her 70s. Well, they're both in their 70s. And I can see them slowing down. And every so often I think, I'm really far away. Because they're in Pennsylvania and I'm in North Dakota. And I can see value in moving back where I could be closer to them. So, I don't know career-wise if that's feasible or smart, but family is a draw for a lot of people, and the reason they'll move back to these rural areas. Now, I also liked that the article did get into some of the other things, like low unemployment is wonderful. I'm glad there's low unemployment in North Dakota, for example. At the same time, if you're a business, do you want to move to an area with low unemployment? Can you find workers in an area with low unemployment? Especially if it's an area that maybe would struggle to attract workers? Maybe not. Low unemployment can be a problem just as much as high unemployment can be a problem. Different kind of problem perhaps, but problem nonetheless. My preparation, I highlighted a couple of paragraphs here that really I thought said things I've been saying. If you lived in a place like Orange City, for instance, you weren't used to dealing with people you didn't know. If your car broke down, you took it to a mechanic who had fixed your parents' car for decades and whose son was on your baseball team in high school. As a result, you were apt to find strangers more threatening than if you had left. I thought that was a good one. People in Orange City received government assistance, but the town was small enough and prosperous enough it was possible to imagine a world without it. If you belonged to a church and you had a crisis, church members would likely help you out. In a small town, you knew what people were up to most of the time. If somebody did something strange or annoying, it often got to you because it said something about the town and by extension about you. The anonymity of a larger place, on the other hand, was more forgiving. To live in a city was to know that you were surrounded by far too many people to ever keep track of. There was just so much that was outside your control that ignoring annoyances, human or otherwise, became a habit. Moreover, repeated encounters with people who didn't think as you did could pry open a certain distance between your beliefs and your emotions. And that quote directly precedes a nice little piece about Lynn Lale, who moved from Orange City to Texas, works as a medevac nurse at Fort Worth. Read that. When I was talking about sometimes with the small towns, it's not so much bigotry as it's just, I don't know. I'm not used to this. I'm not familiar with it. So I would suggest reading her story. Now, there's another good piece further on about a gentleman named Steve Marr. Talks about how his whole idea of moving to this area. He just wanted to gently prod that whole area forward. And he mentions a poet named Kathleen Norris who had lived in New York City but returned to live in her parents' house in small town South Dakota because she had seen how that whole area had been eviscerated, I'm quoting there, by the loss of their young. So he had listened to her speak, and anyway, he was attracted with the idea of putting down roots and giving yourself a chance to grow. But I like that he says he's an agitator, a gentle one, but wants to push Orange City to live up to its religious ideals. He considered himself a progressive Democrat. He'd been raised a conservative Christian family, used to vote Republican. So he felt people, he's from outside. He felt people in Orange City were his people and he knew how to talk to them. And so anyway, his is another good story. Well, there's a lot of good stories there. And I guess there were so many more stories in that one that I could continue on summarizing them. But I need to stop. This has turned way too long. But I put that one in there in the end because it was really a whole big series of anecdotes that kind of illustrate many of the different facets of what I've been talking about in this video. And so thank you so much for sending that one to me because it really is a great place to end this whole series of videos on rural America. Hopeful and yet realistic about what the problems are and what are some of the things that need to be dealt with. And it also shows a very different rural world from that alternate article about rural America. Similarities, but also some important differences. This road is headed north. This is Highway 85. We're leaving Belle Fourche. The next town you'll meet is Buffalo. And then my town. And it's 100 and I forget exactly how many, 100 and some miles with not a whole hell of a lot. So, but I will close it here. I need to rerun this Highway 85 sometime, but I'll do it on a different trip. So I thank you for sticking with me through rural America. I'm hoping to do something different next week. I'm going to go visit somewhere rural, but next video I'm hoping, if everything works out, is going to be a little driving, but also a tour of Lead, South Dakota. And then I have some other footage that I want to use, and yeah, hopefully we'll create something out of it. So thank you for watching, and we'll see you later. Bye-bye. So this one is a little bit late. I turning right here onto was it Highway 14 alternate, which leads you through Spearfish Canyon. And I'll tell you what's happened is I recorded the audio and I just wasn't happy. And then I was busy, which is why I wanted to upload it at that point anyway. So here I am uploading it, getting this puppy done. And what I wanted to get into today is more some personal reflections. And I have a little bit of stuff I got from a viewer that I think is helpful and actually kind of ties it all together very nicely. So I will include that at the end. But don't expect a whole lot of citations and footnotes in this one, because this is more personal opinion, more personal impression. Toward the end, I will also get into a couple articles that I found of interest. I think I have linked them before, but probably did not talk about them deeply. So let me start out with my background. Why do I care about rural United States? Well, I've lived in the rural United States my whole life. I grew up in Pennsylvania, in the rural part of Pennsylvania, although one of those parts was turning quite a lot less rural. College was in a small town, and then I moved to North Dakota in a rural area. In fact, my parents still live in the house where I lived as a high schooler on an unpaved road. So, yeah, I know rural. I have lived it.